She gave them 23 years, built their most secure systems, protected millions in funding, stayed late, spoke softly, and held the company together when no one else could. And at 2:01 a.m., they erased her with a single email. No thank you, no warning, just silence cold and final. But here's what they didn't know. The woman they pushed out still held the key. This is the story of Elena Stroud, a quiet architect of integrity who became the last line of defense when a $90 million deal was about to be signed in her name without her consent. Why did a global biotech firm fire the very person who protected its ethical core? How did they miss the one vulnerability she warned them about? And when she had the chance to watch it all burn, why didn't she get ready for a story of betrayal, quiet power, and one woman's refusal to let silence become complicity? If this opening pulled you in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next will stay with you long after the screen fades. I didn't scream. I didn't cry either. I just sat there on the cold tiles of my kitchen floor, still in my work slacks, back against the cabinet, my legs folded awkwardly beneath me, laptop balanced on my knees. The glow from the screen washed the room in a dim blue hue, cold and sterile, like the email I had just opened. Subject line: immediate termination. Timestamp 2:01 a.m. No greeting, no explanation, no warning, just a single sentence. Effective immediately. Your role with Corova Labs has been dissolved. Return all company property by end of business today. That was it. Not even a signature, not even a line break. 23 years boiled down to 22 words. I stared at it for a while, not in disbelief. That moment had passed long ago. I suppose, on some level, I had sensed this coming the way people avoid eye contact, the way meetings vanish off your calendar one by one. But even when you expect the fall, it still knocks the wind out of you when you land. My name is Elena Stroud. I'm 45 years old, and until 2:01 this morning, I was Vice President of Strategic Integrity and Ethical Finance at Corova Labs. Not that you'd find that title listed anymore. By now, they've probably already archived my profile and removed me from the team page, scrubbed clean, a silent erase. I didn't move for a long time. I don't know how long exactly. Long enough for the laptop screen to dim, long enough for my coffee to go cold. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen in place. Maybe out of shock, maybe out of sheer exhaustion, or maybe because something colder had already crawled its way up my spine. I blinked. The silence in the room felt too sharp to be natural, like the air itself had pulled back. I read the email again, then again looking for something human in it. A typo, a mistake, a line that hinted someone might have hesitated, but it was too clean, too surgical. This wasn't an accident. It was a message, a final one, and it was sent when they knew no one would be awake to answer. That's what stung the most, not the firing, not even the time of night. It was the cowardice. A company I had helped build from a dusty 4-person startup into a global biotech force dismissing me with a silent digital bullet, fired in the dead of night so they wouldn't have to hear the sound of it hitting bone. I looked up toward the hallway. My coat still hung on the rack, where I'd left it after staying late at the office for what would unknowingly be the last time. The lights in my apartment were still off, except for the dim underglow of the fridge. The world outside remained asleep. Only I had been woken. Only I had been erased. And somehow, I didn't feel sadness. Not yet. What I felt was a stillness, heavy, solid, as if the floor and I were conspiring to keep my body grounded while my mind tried not to spiral. I closed the laptop, not because I was done with it, but because I needed to remember how to breathe. Then something strange happened. A voice in the back of my mind whispered, "Check your access." It sounded like me, but it wasn't panic. It was protocol. For years, I had trained our teams to run digital audits, secure transitions, validate removals. I knew the system like muscle memory. Terminations were meant to be immediate. Access revoked within seconds. Security compliance required it, especially for anyone with administrator-level clearance, and I had clearance to everything. So I opened the laptop again, I typed in my credentials, hit enter, and the screen blinked, then loaded. No error, no denial. I was still in, my jaw clenched. Internal servers, admin dashboards, financial terminal, ethics compliance folders, root directories, all of it still active. They actually forgot to disable my credentials. The same vulnerability I'd flagged in a report last quarter, the one Caleb's new digital transformation team marked as non-critical, had just bought me a door back into the house they tried to burn down. The cursor blinked on a clean command line, waiting, and for the first time in hours, so was I. Because if they could erase me with one line of text, maybe I could remind them what it means when the person they tried to erase still has the master key. But that comes later. For now, I just sat there, in the kitchen, with nothing but the sound of my own breathing, the sharp edge of betrayal cutting quietly against my ribs, and the quiet ache of realizing that sometimes the people who benefit most from your silence are the ones most afraid of your voice. You don't stay at a company for 23 years by accident. You stay because you believed in what it could be, even when it wasn't much yet. You stay because someone once looked you in the eye and said, "We need you, not just your skills." That someone was Julian Raymer, Kurova Labs' original founder. When I joined, Kurova wasn't a shimmering glass tower or a name whispered on industry panels. It was 2 rented offices over a shuttered tailor shop, with bad carpet and flickering lights. There was no HR department, no branding deck. Our first compliance form had to be printed on the back of old invoices because we didn't have a working copier. There were 4 of us Julian, a junior chemist named Ravi, a wildly overqualified research assistant named Mia, and me. I wasn't hired with a title. I was brought in because I asked hard questions and organized chaos. Back then, that was enough. I still remember the smell of the place, old coffee, paper dust, floor cleaner, hope. I spent the first 6 months building our first integrity protocol on a borrowed ThinkPad with a screen so dim I had to sit next to the window to read anything after 3 p.m. I worked weekends, nights, not because I had to, but because I wanted to see it work. We didn't have venture capital. We had elbow grease. So when Julian pulled me aside one night after we'd missed payroll for the 2nd time and said, "Elena, I know this is asking too much, but if we can get this next grant approved, I think we might actually survive." I didn't hesitate. I didn't just write that grant proposal. I designed the infrastructure that would govern every future dollar Kurova touched. That's when Greed 9 was born, our financial verification engine. It wasn't pretty. It was mostly code stitched together between insomnia and instant noodles, but it worked. It tracked ethical alignment, source tracing, use of funds patterns. We were nobodies, but we were transparent nobodies. Julian gave me a quiet nod after the first grant cleared. No applause, no bonus, just this that saved us. You know that. Right, I did. And I stayed, even when Julian left, even when new leadership came and called our systems overly cautious, even when my department got renamed twice in a single quarter and buried under buzzwords like velocity compliance. I stayed when we were acquired. I stayed when our first cancer treatment trial failed phase 2. I stayed through reorgs and layoffs, through rushed pivots and failed product launches, because I still believed, and somewhere along the way, I became the person people forgot to look at but never forgot to rely on. When the Global Innovation Trust required an unbreachable ethics interface for any fund recipient, guess who they called me? When a whistleblower claimed we had a funding discrepancy in 2017, who uncovered the fraudulent trail within 72 hours, also me. When the finance team lost all metadata after a cloud migration and thought our entire funding trail was corrupted, guess whose archived logic logs saved the audit? Still me. And yet, at some point, the value stopped being visible. I was no longer Elena, who holds the system together. I became Elena, who slows down decisions. Legacy operator, risk-averse voice. In tech, legacy can become a curse word. It means you were important once, but not anymore. And yet, Gryid 9 still ran under my fingerprint. It required biometric confirmation for any transaction over $10 million. That wasn't about control. It was about accountability. You don't move money of that scale unless you're willing to leave a name behind. And for 15 years, I made sure that name was mine when it counted. I still remember writing that line of logic into the system, late at night, headphones in, coffee cup shaking from the bass of the music. I typed, if not verified, abort transaction. I smiled when I hit enter, not because it was elegant code, but because it was a promise that someone would always have to answer for the money we touched. And that promise had my name written quietly into the code. Now, sitting there in my kitchen, decades later, freshly discarded, I realized something simple. They may have deleted me from the website, scrubbed my title, reassigned my staff, but they hadn't deleted that code. Not yet, and not without me. There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel like quiet. It feels like vanishing. It doesn't happen all at once. It's subtle, professional, almost polite. At first, it's a missing CC on an email thread you started. Then it's a meeting moved to a room you're not invited to. Then it's the shift in glances people look down when you pass. Not because they're busy, but because they're ashamed. The erasure began 3 weeks after Caleb York joined as Chief Operating Officer. He was young, sharp-jawed, confident in that way people become when no one has ever told them they're wrong. Harvard MBA, big energy, no soul. His first company-wide memo used phrases like operational velocity, optimizing legacy structures, and my personal favorite, redefining cultural alignment, which, translated, meant cut out the people who made this place before I got here. And he started with the quiet ones. I wasn't surprised when my access to the project dashboard I'd built was quietly downgraded, or when my quarterly budget forecasts were suddenly being streamlined by someone from his team. But what I didn't expect, what I still foolishly hoped might be a mistake, was the report, the expansion plan. It showed up in my inbox with a smiley face in the subject line. 2026 Grant Pipeline Strategy, Draft. I opened it slowly, coffee in hand, and stopped cold halfway through. Every chart, every projection, every funding simulation, it was mine, word for word. I had written that document over 2 months, midnights and early mornings, fine-tuning every justification so it could survive board scrutiny. But there, at the top, in bold, prepared by Marcus Lynn, Strategy Associate. Marcus, the intern I had mentored, the one I'd walked through audit procedure on a Tuesday when he cried in the copy room from overwhelm. The same Marcus who once said, "I don't know how you hold all this in your head." And I'd laughed and said, "It's not in my head. It's in the system. I just remember where the integrity lives." Now, he was claiming the blueprint. I didn't yell. I didn't storm into his office. I asked him to coffee. He was jumpy the moment he sat down, wouldn't make eye contact, kept fidgeting with his watch. You used my report, I said gently. All of it. His face went pale. Caleb's team wanted examples. I thought. I didn't think you'd see it. You didn't think I'd see my own words? I asked, my voice even, but tight. I thought they were just using it as a reference. I didn't know they'd forward it to the board. He didn't apologize? Not really, because people don't apologize when they think the system has already replaced you. That night, I stayed late in my office. The hum of the air vents buzzed like static in my bones. My nameplate still read Elena Stroud, VP of Strategic Integrity, but it felt like a sticker on borrowed glass. For the first time in 23 years, I felt like a guest in the house I built. The next morning, my 11:00 legal meeting vanished from my calendar. No reason, no reschedule, just gone. When I called to ask, the assistant said, "We'll circle back when your input is needed." That was new. Then came the second hit. Ela, my assistant for nearly 5 years, didn't show up. No text, no call. At first, I thought she was sick, but when I messaged her, I got an auto reply, temporarily reassigned. Please direct inquiries to Marissa Chen. Marissa, new, polished, part of Caleb's onboarding cohort. The same woman I saw shadowing Ella last month during lunch breaks. Taking notes. I remembered thinking it was odd but harmless. Now, I realized Ella hadn't chosen to leave. Someone had quietly reassigned her, without telling me. I should have known then. But hope is a stubborn thing, even in people like me who specialize in spotting red flags. By the end of the week, people were closing tabs when I walked by. Conversations halted mid-sentence when I entered the break room. My access badge flickered red for the first time in years when I tried to open the Ethics Archive server. When I submitted a support ticket, AIT replied, "Your clearance level has been updated in alignment with revised roles." Revised roles. No one had spoken to me. No one asked. They just redrew the walls around my office and waited for me to disappear. But I didn't. Not yet. Not because I had something to prove, but because something deeper was whispering. They're trying to bury you quietly. And you have to decide, are you going to help them dig? So I started documenting everything. Every meeting I was cut from, every change in permissions, every plagiarized file. I made copies, archived emails, printed versions of Greed 9 code commits, just in case, because I knew what was coming. It always starts in the silence, before the final strike lands. And when it did, it came, not with confrontation, but with deletion. But they forgot something. You can delete the person, you can delete the profile, but you cannot delete the architect, especially when she never gave you the blueprint. The night after Ella disappeared from my team, I went home early, not because I'd given up, but because I needed space to think. I didn't turn on any lights, just the screen of my laptop, glowing softly from the kitchen counter. The same counter where I had once reviewed million-dollar funding rounds, now reduced to a glowing stage for a question I couldn't ignore. Did they actually forget to lock me out? A ridiculous thought until I tried it. I opened the terminal, typed in my credentials, held my breath, login successful, not just access to my archived folders or old reports, but full administrative credentials. I was still connected to Greed 9, the ethics compliance engine I designed, the one they renamed last year to Ethos 1 to make it sound more marketable, but they never changed the back end because they didn't know how, and they definitely didn't understand the core logic layer, the one I buried 3 levels deep behind a fingerprint match. coded in modular bash with a custom checksum validator. I told them it was legacy. I didn't tell them it was the lock, because inside Greed 9, there was one protocol I never documented, G-lock. Every transaction over $10 million required biometric override from the original architect, and I made sure there was only one, mine, not for control, for protection, because systems only matter when someone stands guard at the edge. And as I stared at the pending transaction list, my heart dropped. There it was. Transaction ID 90TRN X115 status, pending, final auth, amount $90,000, recipient Global Genesis Trust, initiated by CFO Pulse COO, sign-off timestamp 11:24 a.m., scheduled release 9 hours a.m. next day. My hands froze on the keyboard. I knew this deal. I had spent 8 months negotiating every clause, building audit scaffolds, redesigning logging requirements just to satisfy Genesis's brutal transparency standards. I had walked the trust review board through every line of our ethics verification report. I built the deal, and now they were signing it without me. My chest tightened. They hadn't just fired me. They were using my integrity to legitimize a system I no longer recognized. And worse, they thought I wouldn't notice, wouldn't care, wouldn't have the access. But I did, because Caleb York's team had forgotten the first rule of secure systems. The deeper the foundation, the harder it is to tear out the architect. I opened the override terminal. The cursor blinked steadily, awaiting action. Option 1, authorize and release. Option 2, hold pending internal review. Option 3, revoke authorization and lock future transactions until original architect reapproves. I hovered over each option. My fingers didn't shake, but my mind did. Because this wasn't a technical decision. It was moral. If I revoked, it would freeze Kirova's largest funding stream in company history. It would cause press alarms, investor panic, headlines. But if I let it go through, they would profit from the very values they tried to erase. I looked around my apartment, the same old bookshelf, the same framed photo of our first 5-person team from 2003, the same plant that never grew quite right but refused to die. I had stayed quiet through restructuring, through my title being shifted like furniture no one wanted, through stolen work, erased credits, and lies in quarterly updates. But this was my line. I placed my finger on the scanner. Access granted. A prompt appeared. Are you sure this action will revoke Kirova Labs' ability to complete all major transactions pending architect verification? Proceed. I paused. Then, instinctively, I typed a single line into the system log. Trust is earned. Consent is required. And then I hit confirm. The screen blinked once, then cleared. Transaction removed from queue. Just like that. The gate closed. No hacking, no theft, no breach. Just a quiet refusal. My refusal. Because when you erase someone like me, you forget that we were never just there to approve your forms. We were the ones holding the walls up. And when you cut us out, you don't just lose a person. You lose the logic holding the floor beneath you. I leaned back in my chair. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like weight lifting off shoulders I forgot were heavy. I poured myself a cup of coffee. The real kind. From the French press I barely used anymore. Outside, the city was still quiet. But I knew tomorrow, everything would change. Because in 1 hour, someone would try to move $90 million, and they were going to find that the system said no. Not because it failed, but because it remembered who built it. By 8:12 a.m., the cracks had started to show, not in the system, but in them. I wasn't there, of course. I wasn't in the lobby of Kirova Labs that morning, where glossy banners with phrases like "A new era begins" hung beneath the polished logo. flanked by glass walls and catered coffee. I wasn't backstage, where Caleb York rehearsed a speech he didn't write about transparency. He didn't understand to announce a deal he didn't secure. And I wasn't at the executive terminal, where a junior associate from finance hit release funds and watched the screen flash bright red. Error code G9 Lockdower 01. Authorization failed. Architect approval required. Transaction revoked. They clicked again, then again. Panic crept in. Tech was called. Legal was looped. Whispers buzzed up through the floors like rising heat. And when someone finally scrolled through the system log, they found the signature line, "Trust is earned, consent is required. E. Stroud." That was when the room froze. Not because the money was gone. It wasn't. It was safe. Just not with them. I watched it unfold from a distance, literally. A small cafe across the river, brick walls, ivy creeping up the windows. Same corner table I used to sit at years ago when Kurova was still a company that made me proud. I was there with one person, Jonah Meyer, Senior Director at Global Genesis Trust, the same man who once emailed me at 1:12 a.m. just to say thank you for walking his board through the ethical framework I built. He hadn't asked to meet at headquarters. He asked for this, coffee, no microphones, no press, just two people. "We tried to confirm the transfer," he said gently. "Something stopped it." I nodded. "I know." He didn't push, didn't accuse, didn't bluff, just sat quietly, stirring his espresso. "We assumed it was technical," he continued. "But then your name popped up, and we knew." I exhaled slowly. "It wasn't sabotage." I said. "I didn't think it was," he replied. The silence between us felt clean, not awkward, not guarded, just honest. "Jonah," I said softly, "they tried to sell you integrity they no longer own." He smiled, but there was no joy in it. "I know. I built the system to protect the mission, not the people managing the mission, and it worked. It wasn't meant to be used this way," I added. He looked up. "Then why did you?" I paused. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the answer had weight. Because when the people entrusted with doing the right thing choose performance over principle, then the system has to step in, even if it means choosing silence over applause, even if it means closing the gate. Later that day, my phone rang. Not Kurova, not Caleb. It was Marcus Lynn, the intern turned strategist who had copied my report. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, Marcus." His voice was quiet. I didn't know. He said, "Not everything." "I swear." "You didn't ask. I thought they had this under control." "They don't even know what they're holding," I replied. "That's why it's slipping through their hands." He was silent for a moment. "I saw your name in the override, and I wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry for not speaking up. Then do better," I said gently. "Next time, speak when it matters, not when it's safe." By evening, the headlines had begun. 90 Malers, deal, frozen at Kurova Labs, amid internal system dispute, trust pulls back confirmation, ethics conflict, rumored former VP's name, reappears in block transfer log. No one at Kurova spoke publicly. They couldn't. They were scrambling. I turned my phone over, screen down, because I wasn't watching this to win. I was watching it end, and maybe begin. That night, I opened the drawer in my home office, the one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old notebook, scuffed leather, pages dog-eared, filled with notes from my early days at Kurova. On the inside flap, Julian Raymer. The original founder had written a message back in 2004. It read, "This place will outgrow me. That's the hope. But may it never outgrow its conscience." Elena, guard it when I can't. I ran my fingers over the ink. So much had changed since he left. So much had been stripped away. But that line still pulsed like a beacon. I whispered into the quiet. I did my best. And somewhere deep down, I heard him answer. The next morning, a message landed in my inbox. It was from Jonah. No subject line, just one sentence. What if we build something better together? I didn't reply, not right away. Instead, I sat with it, like a stone in my hand, weighty, cool, real. I had made my choice, not out of vengeance, not out of pride, but because systems only survive when someone stands between the pressure and the principle and refuses to flinch. Even if no one claps, even if no one sees, even if you do it alone. I didn't answer Jonah's message that morning, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew the next reply would change everything. And change, after 23 years of anchoring the same system, doesn't come easily. I sat at my desk, no badge, no office backdrop, no assistant outside the door, just me, a cup of fresh coffee, and a decision waiting like a weight in my chest. What if I said yes? What if I stopped trying to fix a house that no longer had a place for me, and instead built something from the ground up, with the right blueprints this time? What if we created an ethical engine that didn't need rebranding to feel relevant? What if it wasn't an afterthought in the boardroom, but the framework around which decisions were made? What if trust wasn't a PR term, but an operational requirement? I opened my notebook, the same one I used to sketch grant pipeline models during conference calls, and I wrote 3 words across the top of a blank page: G9 Foundation, not flashy, not corporate, just honest, named not after a product, but after a principle. G9, the original logic layer inside the system they tried to rename and co-opt, the one that refused to budge, the one that still had my voice in it. When I finally replied to Jonah, I kept it short. Let's talk. But this time, no boardrooms. Just people, he agreed. We met 2 days later, in a quiet co-working space he rented near the old waterfront. No glass walls, no badges, just a long wooden table, a whiteboard, and enough silence to think clearly. We've reviewed the internal logs, he said. I figured. No security breach, no policy violation, just the system doing exactly what it was designed to do. That was the idea, I said softly. Elena, he paused. We don't just want to partner with you. We want you to lead. I didn't speak right away, not out of hesitation, but because the clarity of it all hit me like breath returning. What would that look like, I asked. Total autonomy. He replied, you build the structure, you hire the team, you define the protocols, we fund it, we back it, and we stay out of the way. It wasn't a pitch. It was an invitation, one that felt more like a beginning than a comeback. The next 72 hours moved like a wave, but this time I was steering. Incorporation papers were filed. I chose a small office off Congress Street. Nothing fancy. Just space to breathe and build. I painted the walls myself, put up a corkboard, wrote one rule at the top in thick black ink. No one from Korova, not in the board, not in the shadows, not ever. I meant it. This wasn't going to be a refuge for the reputationally bruised. This was for the builders, the ones who never had a seat at the table but held it steady from underneath. And when I started reaching out quietly, people came, not because I offered titles or prestige, but because they remembered why they joined this work in the first place. The first message came from Devin, a compliance manager I trained 6 years ago. Elena, legal's become a buzzword graveyard since you left. If you're doing something real, I want in. Then Sophie, a former ethics auditor, who left the industry out of burnout, I miss work that doesn't make me feel like I'm lying for a living. By week 2, I had 10 full-time hires. 5 were people I had mentored. The other 5 came through them. No resumes, just reputations. We didn't have stock options or launch events. We had folding chairs, real coffee, and a mission posted on the wall. Trust is not assumed. It is built, checked, and protected. One rainy morning, I arrived early, 7:45 a.m. The street outside shimmered silver in the storm. The building was quiet, still smelling of paint and fresh beginnings. But someone was already waiting in the lobby. Khaki pants, leather notebook, gray stubble. I froze. Julian. He stood, Julian Raymer, the original founder of Korova Labs, my first mentor, the man who once handed me a grant application at 2 a.m. with the words, "You'll make this make sense. I trust you." I hadn't seen him in over a decade. Didn't want to schedule, he said quietly. Wasn't sure you'd say yes. I smiled. You were the first person I learned to trust in this business. You never needed an appointment. He walked slowly into the office, ran his hand across the whiteboard now covered in frameworks, names, arrows. You kept the name, he said, pointing to G9. It was the only part they couldn't ruin. I replied. He studied me for a long moment. You're not rebuilding what they broke, he said. You're restoring what we almost forgot. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. As he left, he handed me something, a small silver token, old, worn. This was given to me by someone who once told me to protect the work when no one else could see it. Etched on it were 6 words, hold the gate, guard the truth. I closed my hand around it, not in pride, in purpose. This wasn't revenge. This was restoration, and it had just begun. The boardroom wasn't made of glass, no skyline view, no catered coffee or curated light panels, just a solid oak table, 5 worn chairs, and sunlight spilling in through real windows. The walls didn't display corporate slogans. They carried photos of work that mattered: a rural medical clinic in New Mexico, a robotics lab for underfunded schools in Detroit, a handwritten thank you letter from a cancer research team in Nairobi. I sat at the head of the table. In front of me was a folder, 1 document, thick stock, unmarked except for a single header, G9 Foundation, independent partnership charter funded and protected by Global Genesis Trust. To my left sat Jonah Myers, still quiet, still calm, but this time his eyes held relief. To my right sat Tasha Lynn, senior counsel for Genesis, sharp, steady, brilliant. She had flown in that morning to finalize every clause, not to control, to ensure it could not be undone. She turned the folder toward me. "Whenever you're ready," she said softly. I opened it. Just 1 signature line. Mine. I held the pen but didn't write. Not yet. Because something in me needed to pause, not for hesitation, but to feel the weight of this moment. 23 years of late nights, of stolen credit, of systems built and erased. 23 years of holding my tongue, protecting people who stopped protecting the mission. And now, here I was, not fighting, not begging, just signing the future into place. My hand moved. Elena Stroud. But I wasn't done. Underneath, in small handwritten letters, I added a final line, "For those who build in silence and protect in storms." Tasha read it, then nodded. Jonah smiled, no words needed. Just as I closed the folder, a quiet knock came at the door. It opened slowly. A familiar face stepped in. Marcus Lynn, the young intern who once carried my stolen report to the executive board without knowing its weight. He looked different now. No tie, No nervous energy, just clarity. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, voice low. "I just needed to say something." We all turned to him. "You didn't just stop a bad deal," he said. "You reminded us what integrity looks like." I didn't speak. Not at first, because that was enough. That was everything. 3 weeks later, the first official funding release from G9 Foundation cleared. Not with drama, not with headlines, just a confirmation email, a quiet ping, a single line from the audit log, verified by system architect. We moved fast, but we moved right. No cutting corners, no press-driven decisions. The work was real. The mission was personal. And when the press finally caught up, when they asked why I walked away from a $90 million launch and a legacy title, I told them the truth. Because systems don't fall apart from theft. They fall apart from neglect. And I refused to be part of one that no longer remembered what it stood for. The story ran for a few cycles, then faded, just like all stories do. But that was fine, because I wasn't chasing noise. I was building something that would outlast it. Now, I arrive at the office most mornings before sunrise. Same black coffee, same token Julian gave me sitting on the corner of my desk, etched in silver. Hold the gate, guard the truth. Some days I still hear their voices. Caleb, the board, the silence between meetings. But it no longer tightens my chest. It just reminds me I made the right choice. Not the easy one, the true one. And if anyone asks what G9 stands for now, it doesn't stand for a gate, or a grant, or a name etched into legacy code. It stands for a promise. That real integrity, the kind that shows up even when no one is watching, will always have a place to live. Some stories don't end with applause. They end in silence, in the quiet resilience of someone who chose truth over comfort and ethics over applause. Elena Stroud didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight fire with fire. She simply refused to sign away her principles. And in a world that often celebrates speed over substance and image over integrity, she reminded us of something timeless, that value doesn't vanish when someone tries to erase it, that those who build quietly are often the ones holding the system together, and that no matter how polished the title, no matter how young or loud the replacement wisdom, compassion, and principle are irreplaceable. But let's not forget, her story also speaks to something deeper about what happens when age is seen as outdated, when women are sidelined quietly, and when systems reward appearance over accountability. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because this channel is where real stories rise. Stories that challenge, that humanize, that honor the builders the world forgets too soon. And trust us what's coming next. You won't want to miss it.